I continue the systematic and chronological comment of the Phenomenology of Mind. And for those who might still wonder why I'm doing this, maybe it's not clear, but I've already said this in other videos, but religion and philosophy have the same content. So to study philosophy means to understand religion, because they are one, basically. So I'm on page 4. I will put this video in the playlist Exegesis of the Phenomenology. It's in the continuity of others. When we state the true form of truth to be its scientific character, or what is the same thing, when it is maintained that truth finds the medium of its existence in notions or conceptions alone, science for Hegel is what we call mysticism. But the difference between mysticism and Wissenschaft for Hegel is that mysticism is no longer mysterious. It has become scientific through the development of Hegel's philosophy. And when Hegel talks about the concept, I must admit that at this point it's not very clear to me. But for Hegel, the concept is a thought which is singular, particular, and universal. And it is different from what we ordinarily call concepts, because for Hegel there are almost two meanings for each word. It took me a long time to realize this, but Hegel has his own special vocabulary. What we call concepts is what Hegel calls thought determinations or mental representations. It's just a universal abstract determinations. That's not a concept. What he means by concept is self-moving, self-differentiating thought. So it's a thought which is singularized, namely which is embodied in an individual with a particularity and a universality, and this living thought differentiates itself from itself. So it's kind of schizophrenic, if you will. But from this self-differentiation, self-negation, self-alienation, it comes back into itself, it conceptualizes itself. Begreifen, in German, der Begriff, or concept comes from the Latin cum cepi, I think, which means to grasp with, to comprehend, to take with, so to speak. Begreifen is the idea of bringing with, after having self-differentiated. So that's the concept. That's quite vague, but it's a self-conceptualizing, self-thinking, self-differentiating thought. Yeah. Then, if, that is to say, truth exists merely in what, or rather exists merely as what is called at one time intuition, at another time immediate knowledge of the absolute, religion, being, not being in the center of divine love, but the very being of this center, of the absolute itself. From that point of view, it's rather the opposite of the notional or conceptual form which would be required for systematic philosophical exposition. So, what Hegel calls truth is mystical, divine, spiritual. The idea that Hegel might be an atheist thinker, a thinker of the Enlightenment, is one of the most ludicrous ideas I've ever heard. But apparently many scholars believe that Hegel is a rationalistic, in a sense of Enlightenment thinker. And when I talk about mystical experiences, the divine, spiritual realities, I know that for those who have not had a glimpse of the experience of a higher reality, it is unintelligible. So basically, I know that I'm talking emptily because it cannot be made intelligible for someone who has not experienced. But the difference between a guru, a spiritual leader who says, I have had an experience of the divine, trust me, and me, is that precisely I am trying to show that in order to experience the divine, there is an entire conceptual process to follow. So, yeah. Then he says, the absolute on this view is not to be grasped in conceptual form, according to this view, but felt, intuited. It is not its conception, but the feeling of it, or an intuition of it, that are to have the say and fine expression. So Hegel distinguishes the feeling of the divine, God, spirits, the absolute, mystical, higher realities, the intuition, the sensation, the inner feeling of rapture, of ecstasy. That's a very feminine way of experiencing the divine. And in the pagan community, in this day and age, the right-wing European pagan communities, there are people who have experienced the divine. I know this because I understand what they have gone through. And Hegel says that the divine, spirit, God, the absolute, religion, love, whatever, should not be felt or intuited, but thought about, conceptualized. So Hegel is a thinker. Yeah. If we consider the appearance of a claim like this in its more general setting, and look at the level which the self-conscious mind at present occupies, we shall find that self-consciousness has got beyond the substantial fullness of life, beyond the satisfaction and security arising from the assurance which consciousness possessed of being reconciled with ultimate reality and with its all-pervading presence within as well as without. So it can be interpreted in two ways. The context of early 19th century Germany, I've made videos about this in my playlist Wissenschaft der Logik. I will not repeat what I've said. If you're interested, you can check the videos. But in our day and age, the self-consciousness that spirit has reached upon itself is made manifest in spiritual communities. And if you want to have a broad representation of what the substantial fullness of life, or the idea of the satisfaction and security arising from the assurance of the presence of the divine. There's a video by TED, to which I will put a link down below, and you see the woman, she's in a state of transcendence within being. She's kind of joyful to be. And this is the kind of mode of being that Hegel refers to. So we have examples in this day and age of people who live in a state of unity with all things. They feel happy to be. And that's what Hegel talks about. So spirit or mind has not merely lost its essential and concrete life, it is also conscious of this loss and of the transitory finitude characteristic of its content. People today are aware vaguely that there is something missing, there is a problem. They do not know really what, that's why they pursue money and fame and sex and food and social status and stuff like that, because they are missing something. They feel a void in their life, but they do not know, at least in the West, that the void that they feel is the lack of the presence of the divine. And yeah, I will talk about this feeling of loss. The Christians, the so-called self-identified Christians in the West, they kind of wait for God. They believe that they are God's chosen people, like the Jews, but there came Christ and now these are the Christians. So they believe that God will take care of everything. But the pagans, right-wing European pagans, they seek to know the divine. They are on a quest to understand the divine, to rediscover their roots, to to experience the divine. And one might say that's blasphemy, but Hegel says that the duty for every Christian is to have the conceptual knowledge of God, the cognitive knowledge of God. This is what the Christian religion requires from its believers and followers, to have a cognitive knowledge of God. And today's so-called Christians, not many seek to know God. They go to church, they believe, they pray, they hope, they behave as righteous Christians. I don't doubt this, but there's no attempt to know cognitively. And the pagans, on the other hand, they feel a loss, an absence, and they go on a quest to seek to re-establish the knowledge of the divine and to become one with the divine. And one might say, from a Christian perspective, that's blasphemy, that's heresy, that's paganism. But the Christian religion is the religion which teaches that God himself became man, and that man is God, basically, through Jesus. So the difference between Christianity and paganism is just an inverted vision. The pagans believe that the infinite is to be found within the finite, and the Christian believes that the infinite made himself finite through Christ, and both say exactly the same thing, basically. So, yeah. Spirit now desires from philosophy not so much to bring it to a knowledge of what it is. So mind or spirit, according to Hegel, doesn't want to know what it is, what being or spirit is, as to obtain once again through philosophy the restoration of that sense of solidity and substantiality of existence it has lost. Philosophy is thus expected not so much to meet this want by opening up the compact solidity of substantial existence, that's very important, and bringing this to the light and level of self-consciousness, is not so much to bring chaotic conscious life back to the orderly ways of thought and the simplicity of the notion, but expects to restore the feeling of existence. So this is very important, because to open up the compact solidity of the substantial life and bring it to the clarity and order of the notion, we, wherever there is a we are within being, we experience being, in order to think about being, to conceptualize, to rationalize, to order, to classify, to think about being, to acquire knowledge of what being is and what we are as different individuals. And whenever one thinks about any particular determination of being, physics, chemistry, biology, logic, mathematics, the social sciences, economics, sociology, politics, whatever, art, it is a mode of the substance, as Spinoza would say, an individual mind thinking about a part of the substance. So if the mode, the individual mind, is a part of the substance, it means that a part is thinking about the whole. And by producing knowledge, thinking minds produce knowledge about themselves. The substance uses minds and men to know itself. That's a trick, a cunning of reason. And the only this is a very important idea. We are living in an age of revelation, which is the self-revelation of the substance, which is the self-revelation of God, because knowledge is being produced throughout the world by thinking minds about being, because there is nothing outside of being. Or there is nothing outside, no, strictly speaking, there is nothing within being, but this is not what I wanted to say. The idea is that apart from being, which is nothing, there is nothing. So the history of nations is being written as I speak, because there are thinkers, journalists, intellectuals, scholars of academics who write the history of this nation, the history of trade, the history of law, the history of money, the history of sea travel, the history of technology, the history of this or that. So the history of being is being written and is being made accessible to those who have the leisure and the luxury and the time to access this knowledge. So we are in a process of self-revelation, because if I had to talk like Spinoza, I would say that the only agent is the substance. But if I had to talk like Hegel, I would say that the substance is a subject. Yeah. What mind wants from philosophy is not so much insight as edification. People do not want to be enlightened, they want to be morally elevated. The beautiful, the holy, the eternal, religion, love, these are the bait required to awaken the desire to bite. Not the notion, but ecstasy, not the march of cold necessity in the subject matter, but ferment and enthusiasm. These are to be the ways by which the wealth of the concrete substance is to be stored and increasingly extended. So, people who go on a religious path, they expect to find the eternal, the beautiful, the holy, the sacred, the spiritual. They want the good parts. But the bad part, the price to pay to access these baits, these tempting fruits, is, in the words of Hegel, the march of cold necessity. At least Hegel was honest. Yeah. So, to be honest, I kind of have my problems with Hegel, because me too, I expected to find the beautiful, the holy, the eternal, religion and love, and then I discovered that there was cold necessity. But if I had to pay homage to Hegel, I would say that he's a profound thinker, and he's the only serious thinker in matters of religion and philosophy. And he deserves credit for that. With this demand, there goes the strenuous effort, almost perfervidly zealous in its activity, to rescue mankind from being sunken in what is sensuous, vulgar, and of fleeting importance, and to raise man's eyes to the stars, as if man had quite forgotten the divine. I have been guilty of that, because what I'm trying to do with my videos is to rescue myself and rescue mankind from being sunken in what is vulgar, sensuous, and of fleeting importance, and to elevate consciousness to the contemplation of what is divine, basically. Time was when man had a heaven decked and fitted out with endless wealth of thoughts and pictures. The significance of all that is lay in the thread of light by which it was attached to heaven. So here, I'm not sure of the interpretation, but the way I interpret this is that Hegel somehow is referring to the Middle Ages, and in modern day context, this view of a time with the significance of everything laying in the thread of light attached to heaven is in the pagan community the nostalgia for pre-Christian Europe. They believe that before the Christians, we had Europeans, our ancestors had a full relationship to being. Everything had a meaning, customs, rituals, our relationship with nature, our knowledge of mythology, our morality, and so on and so forth. And this expresses a nostalgia of what could be called a cosmos. And the difference between the universe and the cosmos is that the idea of the cosmos is the idea of a universe, but which is structured in a well-ordered totality. The modern distinction comes broadly from the Renaissance. In the Renaissance, there still had the idea of a cosmos, but there began to be developed the idea of the universe, which was infinitely vast and with no meaning. And modern science developed the idea of an infinitely vast, empty, purposeless universe, whereas the cosmos is an ordered totality in which each piece belongs to the whole. Each moment has a place, is important, is valued within the whole. And this holistic view has been searched and sought and desired in the realm of politics. The ideal of politics is to establish a political community where everyone would belong, everyone would have a place. That's the idea of communism and of fascism. And it's just the political aspect of this philosophical and religious view of a cosmos, a cosmic totality, which means a totality in which all the parts fit together. And Hegel says, basically, that's how I interpreted this, that in the Middle Ages, before the advent of modernity, life was meaningful for everyone. It was not necessarily pleasant all the time, but it was meaningful, and everyone had a sense of belonging to an ordered totality in the realm of politics and in the realm of religion and mythology. Yeah. Then, the mind's gaze had to be directed under compulsion to what is earthly and kept fixed there, and it has needed a long time to introduce that clearness which only celestial realities had into the crassness and confusion shrouding the sense of things earthly, and to make attention to the immediate present as such, which was called experience of interest and of value. So that's very important, because the way I interpret this passage is that he's referring to the turning point between the end of the 16th century, the beginning of the 17th century, with the development of modern science, with men like Galileo, Bacon, Descartes, Newton, Huygens. It's the moment of der Verstand, namely when the scientific rationalistic mind started to inquire into the realm of earthly existence. Before that, in the Middle Ages, and the transition was the Renaissance, but in the Middle Ages, thinking minds were focused on the celestial spheres. According to Aristotle's philosophy, the celestial spheres were perfect, the movements were harmonious, and in the realm of earthly existence, it was kind of chaotic. And the scientific revolution consisted in showing, through experiment and observation and a renewed interest in earthly things, in nature, in the earthly sphere, that there was intelligibility and rationality and rules and order and a mathematical understanding of the earthly existence was possible. And this scientific and epistemological revolution, namely the idea that the earthly sphere under the heavens and under the movement of the sun, the planets, the moon, etc., was rational. It brought about the downfall of religion and the downfall of metaphysics. And the symbol is Newton dealing a deadly blow to metaphysics, because Newtonian science was so strong in its ability to predict the phenomena that the speculation of the metaphysicians seemed empty and pointless and useless. And this has been a great and turning point in the history of the development of thought. So, yeah. Now we have apparently the need for the opposite of all this. Man's mind and interest are so deeply rooted in the earthly that we require a like power to have them raised above that level. His spirit shows such poverty of nature that it seems to long for the mere pitiful feeling of the divine in the abstract. By the little which can thus satisfy the needs of the human spirit, we can measure the extent of its loss. Hegel says basically that now the opposite is necessary to restore the knowledge of the divine, but not to go back in the pre-modern medieval view of mythology and religion and divine truth, but to incorporate the moment of modernity, which is the moment of der Verstand, of the empirical sciences, and to unite science as we understand this, moderns, and religion. And this is what Hegel calls Wissenschaft. It's a knowledge of the divine, which includes within itself the moment of der Verstand. And I've made many videos about the distinction between die Vernunft and der Verstand in the playlist Die Wissenschaft der Logik. If you are interested, I recommend that you should watch these videos because I've put a lot of effort into these videos and I believe that they are important. So yeah, this is what Hegel says. So we have to go back to the knowledge of the divine by elevating ourselves through thinking activity above the mundane, not to negate and to abandon, but to conceptualize. Yeah. And I will end with a last quote. This easy contentment in receiving or stinginess in giving does not suit the character of science. Wissenschaft for Hegel is mystical knowledge. The man who only seeks edification, who wants to envelop in mist the manifold diversity of his earthly existence and thought, and craves after the vague enjoyment of this vague and indeterminate divinity, he may look where he likes to find this. He will easily find for himself the means to procure something he can rave over and puff himself up withal. But philosophy must beware of wishing to be edifying. So Hegel is always the guy who says, let's be serious. Beware of edification. Philosophy is a serious business, so it kind of ruins the mood all the time, but at least he's a serious thinker. And the vague enjoyment of this vague divinity or this vague indeterminate spirits is the kind of spirituality that we find in the modern gurus, the enlightened beings, the spiritual teachers, the so-called prophets or whatever. They talk about, I have a feeling of spirituality or the divine, or I believe that this or that. So it's indeterminate, it's vague. Hegel says that spirit and the divine can and should be known seriously and cognitively and with effort and with work and patience and suffering. But if I had to be honest, I would say that Hegel is maybe the only serious thinker. He is a serious thinker. He thinks things through with seriousness, and for that I admire Hegel. Yeah, so that's what I had to say. Yeah.